We submit that's an integral part of our theory of defense, and the court commits error by not instructing this jury properly on the law.
I understand. I've already ruled, and you continually disagree with this court every time I make a ruling. I have provided you on 3 separate occasions with the court's professional conduct in the courtroom, and included in that is do not continue to argue with the court after we've ruled.
Welcome back to Hardball. That was defense attorney Don West and Judge Deborah Nelson going back and forth earlier today in the latest of what has been a series of tense exchanges throughout this trial. And now, as the defense prepares its closing arguments, the question some people are asking is, could West's apparently strained relationship with the judge affect the trial? We continue now with our panel, Lisa Bloom, Alex Ferrer, and Joseph Haynes Davis. Yesterday, Judge Nelson reminded George Zimmerman that he was not required to testify, but when she asked whether he would like to, defense attorney Don West cut in.
Mr. Zimmerman, have you made a decision as to whether or not you want to testify in this case?
Not at this time. No.
Okay, and when is it that how long do you think you need before you make that decision?
May we have an opportunity to speak? The case isn't concluded yet.
I understand that, and I've asked Mr. Zimmerman if he needed more time to talk to his attorneys, and if he does, I will afford it to him. Mr. Zimmerman, how much more time do you think you're going to need to discuss this with your attorneys?
I assume it would depend on how long the recesses are. At the end of the day.
Okay, well, if your attorneys have finished with 2 witnesses before the end of the day, do you think that you would then know whether or not you want to testify?
On Mr. Zimmerman's behalf, that decision...
I am asking your client questions. Please, Mr. West.
I object to the court inquiring of Mr. Zimmerman as to his decision about whether or not to testify.
Your objection is overruled.
Lisa Bloom, how much of this has played itself out in front of the jury? For example, in that particular moment, the jury was not in the courtroom, but there have been other instances where I'm sure they got the vibe that all is not well between Judge Nelson and the defense counsel.
Right. This was not in front of the jury, and when he was talking and talking and talking the other night, and she got up and walked out of the courtroom while he was talking, that was also not in front of the jury. She has given some tough rulings on objections that he's made in front of the jury. You know, I'm of 2 minds about it. Frankly, I like Don West a lot. I think he's an outstanding courtroom lawyer. He's had some bad moments, the knock-knock joke, but I've watched almost every minute of this trial, and I think he's really honed in on some details and shown high levels of intelligence and aggressiveness for his client. But bottom line is, right, when the judge is talking, you have to stop. When the judge issues a ruling, you have to live with it. You don't get to keep arguing, and you certainly don't get to object to things that the judge is saying.
Judge Alex, here's the moment that Lisa was referring to. On Tuesday, Don West complained about the long hours and lack of time that the defense team has had to go over evidence that it says the prosecution withheld. Judge Nelson walked out of the courtroom.
Judge, I'm not physically able to keep up this pace much longer. It's 10 o'clock at night. We started this morning. We've had full days every day. Weekends, depositions at night. Thank you.
Judge Alex, I'd love to hear your perspective as a former Florida Circuit Court judge about what you see in that dynamic.
These two clearly have either a history or an undercurrent of tension. It's been there since pretrial motions. They don't appear to like each other, and it bubbles to the surface. I can understand the defense's position on that argument there because it's 10 o'clock at night. And there is case law that says if you keep the lawyers too late during trial and they can't adequately prepare, it can result in a retrial of a case. But there's a tension there that I think that exchange we saw between the judge and West about whether or not Zimmerman was going to testify, that was each one of them pressing each other's buttons. Neither one of them had to do what they were doing at that particular moment, but they intentionally were, and I think that just shows the undercurrent that's existed
So,
throughout.
Mr. Davis, based on your experience, how important is this in the eyes of the jurors? In the end, do they discount this, or do they take their lead from the individual sitting there wearing a robe?
Well, as counsel has said, most of this has happened out of the eyes of the jury. When the jury comes back, both parties, my esteemed colleague, Mr. West, who I agree with counsel saying that he's a very good attorney, he's board certified in this area, and Judge Nelson, when they come back, they put on, quote unquote, their game faces, and the jury is likely to never know. If the jury is able to pick up some tension throughout the trial, I believe that the jury is intelligent enough to know that that is part and parcel to this very, very important case that is being presented in front of them.
Here's what I'm wondering, Lisa. I would argue that Don West got off to a bad start with Judge Nelson with that knock-knock joke that he made in his opening statement. Here's a reminder.
Knock, knock. Who's there? George Zimmerman. George Zimmerman, who? All right, good. You're on the jury. Nothing? That's funny.
He was criticized and he later did apologize for making the joke. Lisa, any possibility that from the get-go she just looked at that and said, like, what's this guy doing in my courtroom?
I don't think so. It was definitely a false note, but throughout the testimony, I think he's done a great job of remaining calm, asking very intelligent questions, sometimes tying the witnesses up on knots, particularly turning a number of prosecution witnesses into defense witnesses. And look, this is a murder trial. It's not a tea party. It's not about getting the judge to like you, and on the judge's side, it's not about getting the attorneys to like you. He's trying to defend his client, and he's also trying to make a record in the event that his client is convicted that can be used on appeal. And to do that, he's got to say certain things in the courtroom, even if he thinks he's going to get some pushback from the judge. And, you know, she makes reference to the rules of professional conduct. He's not going to be censured. He's not going to get in any trouble. He hasn't actually crossed that line, I don't think.
I think the four of us are saying that the lawyering has been pretty strong in this case thus far. Judge Alex, evaluate the response from the bench. How has she done from your perspective?
Well, I mean, I can see times when she gets testy with the defense, but honestly, a lot of times, you know, when people say, well, she always rules against the defense, a lot of times that's because the defense is doing something wrong. I mean, that does happen. If you remember the Casey Anthony case, Judge... I remember the judge's name, he's a friend of mine. The judge in that case ruled against the defense over and over and over again, but that's because the defense was wrong. And so it's not a matter of balancing things out. I think that she is a conscientious judge. She's a bright judge. She's trying to do the right thing. I've disagreed with some of her rulings, but I don't see anything that is overt animus in the sense of affecting the case.
Real quick answer from you. Have you seen anything in this case thus far that you regard as possible reversible error?
Have I?
Yes.
Well, I think there's a question about the special jury instruction that the defense requested on provocation. There's a case law on point on that issue. I think she should have given that special instruction, and she didn't. That could come back to haunt her.
Lisa Bloom, Alex Ferrer, Joseph Haynes Davis, all staying with us. Coming up, more on the Zimmerman trial. The prosecution is done. Tomorrow, it's the defense's turn. What's the best case that they can make? This is Hardball, the place for politics.